In some ways, this evening's gospel almost seems like it's a repeat of last week. Last week, it was the experience of Thomas, who is not with them when the Lord appears and shows them the nail marks, the wounds of his crucifixion. But here again, we have the men who are on that road to Emmaus who have returned in another experience of the presence of Christ, the risen Lord. And again, he is showing them the marks and reminding them of the power of resurrection. And I would like to take from that experience and remembering last week's two simple lessons. One is the idea of resurrection doesn't mean perfection. And the other is that resurrection is not a noun, but a verb. Let's look at that first one. That resurrection does not mean perfection. It was a couple of months ago that I was reading about a painting in the museum, the Metropolitan in New York. It's a painting by the famous artist Matisse. And in that painting, it explained that it was of a woman who was holding a child. And it's just a simple pencil drawing and that wonderful simplicity that is Matisse's style. But this time, as he was drawing the curve of the hand, or as he was doing the movement of the eye, he would go over it with his pencil more than once. He was correcting the initial beginning, the initial mark, the initial thought, and making it better or improving it or changing it. Now, most artists have done that. Rembrandt did it, and all the famous artists beyond him, and even the more newer ones with Caravaggio and even Monet. A lot of them corrected their initial stroke, their initial thought of how that line would be or that painting would occur. But Matisse did not. He left his erasures there. He kept just going over and changing them. And I thought that was a good image for what we do with resurrection. The resurrection of Christ and the nail marks on his hands, the signs of his woundedness, should remind us that resurrection isn't about being perfect. It is about being redeemed, being made new, being made whole, even in the broken places. Even in the places that are difficult. So one of the first things about resurrection is you don't have to continue to think you're only good when you're perfect. You're only acceptable when all things are right. You're only in God's love when all you do is correct and loving. Even in our erasures, even in the times when we have not done it right, even when we didn't get it right, even when we had to correct it. Resurrection is about an ongoing conversion of being better than we are, of being called to holier than we are right now, of being seen in God's eyes. I may see myself as broken, fragmented, and somehow not quite right, not always what I should have been. And here, resurrection means, but God sees me differently. He sees me with all the erasures, with all the ones I've corrected, all the ways I've gone astray but tried to get back. That's resurrection. It means I don't have to live thinking I need to be perfect. I can live imperfectly as long as I keep living in the sight of resurrection, with the erasures, always living with the knowledge that I just need to work toward conversion, letting my heart be changed, letting the erasures be made over again. They call it in art pimento, an Italian word that means you're repeating it over and over again, doing it more than once. Yeah, I make mistakes, and every time I try to go back over and do it better. That's resurrection. Every time I don't give in to defeat and try to start all over again. That's resurrection. Every time I recognize that I am not all that I want to be, but I can be better and more because of God's love for me, that's resurrection. That's what I think the nail marks can tell us. That's what I think Easter is about. It's not about perfection. It's about an ongoing conversion, about accepting who I am in the eyes of God, and knowing that God's love and mercy will make me, help me, call me to a better person. That's resurrection. So if you are stuck and you're caught in not thinking you're good enough, not loved enough, the Lord would say, but you're resurrected from that thinking. You're drawn up from that belief. That's the erasures. That's the nail marks. That's the promise of resurrection. And then there is another thing, that resurrection is really not a noun, because it's not something that just happens when we die. Resurrection is an ongoing experience in life. We began this liturgy with water, sprinkled upon us, said you died in that water. Now rise to new way living, resurrection. It happens for the very moment of our life in the church till we die, rising above all kinds of things. There's an insightful theologian, Megan McKenna. She writes so many wonderful books. But one of her books she wrote, it's called Not Counting Women and Children, Neglected Stories of the Bible. It's an interesting book. I had a chance to work with her a number of years ago, and she told a story that later she recounted in the book. She was giving a parish mission, and in this parish mission, she was talking about resurrection and how you and I must be signs of the resurrection, of course. But she said, instead of just being a sign, be an instrument. Be someone who brings about resurrection. And so she talked about that with great passion, about how you and I must be instruments of resurrection for other people. And as she was talking, it was a parish mission, there was someone in the back of the church who shouted out, "Have you ever raised someone from the dead?" Now, she said, that started me cold. Yeah, that would stop me cold as well. Have you ever been a sign, a hope, perhaps? But have you ever been an instrument of resurrection to someone? That might be a different question. So she went on to explain to that gentleman and to others who were there. She wrote this, and I kept it here in my notes. She said, every time I bring hope to a situation where there is despair, I have raised someone from the dead. Every time I have brought joy to someone who only felt there was hopelessness, I have brought resurrection. Every time I forgive another and give them back their dignity and restore them to a possible future of a relationship with me or the community, I have been an instrument of resurrection. Every time I have listened to someone others have neglected, affirmed their goodness when others have taken it away, I have been an instrument of resurrection. Every time I have spoken truth to power, every time I have restored confidence to someone who had been robbed of their goodness, I have been an instrument of resurrection. Now, that's a different way of thinking of Easter and joy and resurrection, but it is the possibility that all of us are instruments of resurrection, and that is Easter. It is not just a noun, something that will happen at the end of our life and at the end of eternity, but exactly it is the beginning of our life in the water and the beginning of our everyday. We are called to be instruments of resurrection. So maybe it is a repeat of last week's gospel, those wounds being shown, but maybe a different way of seeing them. A reminder that it means I don't have to be perfect. I am just called to an ongoing experience of new life, new hope, and conversion. And it reminds me that resurrection is indeed something I can do, something I am called to do, something I am meant to bring about. Resurrection is something I can do. How have you been an instrument of resurrection this week?